Welcome back to another Explainer. Today we're diving right into the center of a literal multi-billion-dollar storm brewing at one of America's oldest institutions. We are going to completely break down the current financial and political crisis gripping the United States Postal Service. It's a crazy story full of massive financial deficits, intense partisan divides, and a brand new leadership team desperately trying to navigate the chaos.
Okay, let's kick things off with a number that is, frankly, impossible to ignore. $2.5 billion. That's the net loss the United States Postal Service reported for just the third quarter of fiscal year 2026. I mean, really think about the sheer scale of that number for a single quarter. We're looking at an agency that is just hemorrhaging cash at an alarming rate, setting the stage for what can really only be described as a historic crisis.
To make sense of all this, here is our roadmap. We'll start with the new Postmaster General, look at the financial bleed, break down the political crossfire, and wrap up with the future of mail.
All right, Section 1, a new Postmaster General.
To really grasp how we got here, we have to look at how incredibly fast things have shifted at the top. Back in March of 2025, after a nearly 5-year run, Louis DeJoy resigned under some pretty intense White House pressure. Just a few months later, in July of 2025, David Steiner stepped up as the nation's 76th Postmaster General. Fast forward to August 2026, which is exactly where we are today, and Steiner is already trying to steer the ship through some unbelievably turbulent waters. He didn't just inherit a fancy title, right? He inherited a deeply entrenched crisis.
So, what does that inherited baggage actually look like? Well, DeJoy's tenure was incredibly controversial. Steiner walked into an agency actively dealing with a massive national grievance filed by the letter carriers union over new rules that basically banned overtime. On top of that, you've got House subpoenas flying around regarding severe mail delivery disruptions, plus a ton of concerns over the handling of mail-in ballots. And if that wasn't enough, they were also facing lawsuits from voting rights advocates over internal restructuring. That is the incredibly tense foundation David Steiner stepped onto.
Moving right along to Section 2, the financial bleed. And we're talking about a severe cash crisis here.
Consider these numbers. In the third quarter of fiscal year 2025, the agency lost an astonishing $3.1 billion. Now compare that to the $2.5 billion loss in the same quarter of 2026. On one hand, sure, you could say that's an improvement. But on the other hand, a $2.5 billion quarterly loss proves that the financial crater is still overwhelmingly huge. The bleeding has slowed down just a tiny bit, but the patient is absolutely still in critical condition.
But how does this deepening deficit actually impact you and me? Well, it boils down to this number, 95 cents. To help plug this giant financial hole, Postmaster General Steiner has proposed bumping up the price of a standard first-class stamp from 90 cents to 95 cents, and he isn't stopping there either. He's already seeking approval for another price hike scheduled for January 2027, so the financial burden is literally being passed right to the consumer at the post office counter.
But here's the thing. Stamp hikes alone just aren't cutting it anymore. The crucial point is what Steiner is doing next. He recently announced plans to ask Congress for what he's calling a relatively modest appropriation just to help fund basic operations. Guys, this is a staggering development. It's a highly unprecedented move because the Postal Service is traditionally designed to be entirely self-funded, surviving purely on the revenue it makes from postage and services. Going hand-in-hand to Congress for taxpayer funds is a giant red flag signaling just how dire this cash shortage really is.
And listen, Steiner is not mincing words about what happens if Congress refuses to help. He's issued a stark warning outlining a very grim reality for Main Street America. Without congressional action, the USPS could completely run out of cash by early 2027. If that happens, they might be forced to shutter thousands of unprofitable post offices, drastically slash current service levels, and lean into even steeper price hikes. This isn't just some abstract accounting issue. We are talking about the fundamental, physical infrastructure of American communication hanging in the balance here.
This brings us to Section 3, the political crossfire. It is a partisan battleground out there.
Unsurprisingly, we are seeing intense pressure from politicians, and they are heavily focused on election integrity. Just this past August, Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy called directly on the Postal Service Board of Governors to oust David Steiner. The accusation? Krishnamurthy claims Steiner has used the agency to implement an election mail executive order originating from President Trump, an order that federal courts have actually twice ruled violates the Constitution. The congressman explicitly accused Steiner of having transformed USPS into a partisan instrument of voter suppression. It really highlights how deeply tangled the Postal Service has become in our nation's most heated constitutional debates.
So essentially, the Postal Service is fighting a two-front political war right now. On one side, you have that fierce constitutional clash over election mail and voting access that we just covered, but on the flip side, there is a totally separate, equally fierce legislative brawl happening over executive compensation and accountability centered around something called the Reform Act. Let's unpack that second one. The Reform Act is a bipartisan piece of legislation designed to mandate accountability. It would basically tie the financial bonuses of the Postmaster General and his deputy directly to verifiable improvements in mail service. Interestingly, in a letter to senators, Postmaster General Steiner pushed back really hard against this. He argued that while bonus restrictions wouldn't really affect him personally, they would severely hurt the agency's ability to attract highly qualified corporate leaders down the road. His argument is essentially that you can't recruit top-tier talent to fix a broken agency if you heavily restrict what they can earn.
All right, final part, Section 4, the future of mail and the very real roadblocks ahead. Here is a perfect example of how this money crisis just completely stalls progress. Right now, there is a bipartisan effort in the Senate to add over 70 new zip codes across the country to handle growing communities and shifting demographics. Sounds like a good idea, right? Well, Postmaster General Steiner vehemently opposes it. Why? Because implementing those new zip codes would cost the already cash-strapped Postal Service $800 million. That's right, just organizing new mail routes costs more than most Hollywood blockbusters. It's this constant, brutal tug-of-war between expanding public service and stopping the financial bleed.
So what does this all mean? It leaves us with one massive, unavoidable question as we look at the reality of this beloved institution. Given the billions bleeding out every single quarter, the depletion of cash reserves by 2027, and the partisan battles paralyzing its leadership, can the United States Postal Service actually survive on its own as a self-funded entity? Or, despite its entire history, is a massive, unprecedented taxpayer bailout simply inevitable? That is the multi-billion-dollar question hovering over every single piece of mail delivered in America today. Keep learning, stay curious, and we'll catch you in the next explainer.